At 35, I thought my life was a tidy stack of folders, color-coded, sensible, and safe. Then truth cracked it open. I stood in my bathroom one Tuesday night, toothbrush in hand, looking at a stranger who finally whispered, "I'm gay." The next morning, the world looked brighter, scarier, and strangely kind. And a few weeks later, in a quiet corner of a library, I met a man with a smile that made everything make sense. For the first time. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe, share, and comment your journey. Your voice helps someone feel less alone today. I'm sitting at my kitchen table as I tell you this, with the same dented blue mug my mother gave me when I moved into my first apartment. Outside the window, a city bus sighs at the curb and a dog walks his owner past the maple tree. It's an ordinary evening, the kind I used to fill with noise. Podcasts, TV, another spreadsheet I promised I wouldn't open. I lived inside that noise for a long time. It felt safer there, but the truth kept knocking. It always does, even when you think you've got the lock figured out. When I was a kid, my mother had this thing she'd say whenever I asked her how she knew she loved my dad. She'd chuckle, rinse the soap off the dishes, and say, "It was like when you finally find the right key. You don't have to force it. The door just opens." I liked that image. It felt trustworthy, like the creak of our screen door in Summer or the scratch of the turn signal on the old Buick. I listened to the story enough times that I thought I understood love as a set of coordinates I could just follow if I behaved, studied hard, and was kind to people. That's what a lot of us were taught. Love as a map you inherit. And so I tried to follow it. I dated women. They were smart and funny and in many cases kinder to me than I deserved. I smiled in photos and held hands at county fairs and bought flowers when the calendar told me to. I kept waiting for that effortless turn of the key, but the door stayed stiff, the lock resistant. There was no fault in these women, no lack of goodness in those evenings. But every time I committed to the path, my chest filled with a fog that never burned off. I told myself I was a late bloomer. It was my favorite phrase, as comfortable as an old sweatshirt. Late bloomers become splendid, I reminded myself. Just give it time. I took a job with benefits and a 401k. I learned how to make a pot roast that didn't dry out, and I smiled my way through small talk. I convinced myself that quiet sadness was simply the cost of adulthood. And honestly, life was good in so many ways. I loved my family. I loved the city I lived in. The way the bakery on Elm opened its windows in spring, and the way the crossing guard waved at every kid like they were an old friend. It's easy to settle into that goodness and call it enough. Then one Tuesday night, after a dinner that tasted like cardboard and a hollow scroll through other people's joy on my phone, I caught my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. There was toothpaste on my lip and a little wrinkle between my eyes. I looked tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. I had just come from a work meeting where a colleague joked about my bachelor lifestyle, and everyone laughed. The joke rolled around in me like a penny in a dryer. I turned on the faucet and said just under my breath, "I'm tired." And then the truth, old and patient, rose up like it had been standing just outside the door this whole time. I tried latching the door. I tried changing the subject. I tried deciding I didn't care. But there it was, as plain as the tile beneath my feet. I'm gay. I didn't say it eloquently. There was no string music. I said it like a person calling out into a cave and waiting to hear the echo. I'm gay. The sound of my voice startled me. But when I heard it come back, something loosened in my chest. The fog moved just a little. The room didn't spin. My life didn't collapse. Water still ran from the faucet. The upstairs neighbor still dropped something heavy. If you're watching this, and the words live in your mouth, I want you to know, the world holds more gently than you might fear. It doesn't fix everything, but it's a start. For me, it was the start. The next morning, the street looked the same and different. It was February, and the sidewalks wore thin scarves of ice. I walked to work with my hands in my pockets and a secret that felt both fragile and enormous. I tried the words out again in my head, like testing a new pair of shoes around the house. I'm gay. I'm gay. I made it to my desk and answered emails. Nobody knew, but I knew. That made all the difference. When you're 35 and you've kept a part of yourself locked away, there's a combination of grief and relief that hits you. Grief for the years you spent speaking around your own name. Relief because for the first time, you can hear your own voice cleanly. I spent that first week crying in these small, unexpected bursts. Like when I opened the fridge and saw the birthday card my niece had drawn stuck to the door. Or when a coworker brought me an extra donut because she could tell I needed it. I cried not because I was sad in the old way, but because something inside me was thawing. The first person I told was my friend Maya. We met freshman year of college when she found me sitting on a staircase pretending to read. She has always had this way of seeing me kindly. We live in the same city now, and she was the one who always said, "Daniel, you don't have to live inside a story someone else wrote. You can write your own." I texted her, "Can you meet me at the diner after work? I need to talk." She sent a heart, then a thumbs up, then a string of plate emojis because the diner has good pancakes at all hours. I got there early, ordered coffee, and wrapped my hands around the warm mug like in a movie scene. The waitress Pam knows me by name and calls everyone Han in a way that makes you feel looked after. When Maya slid into the booth, she squeezed my hand and said, "Talk to me." I felt my throat close. I had rehearsed a speech on the walk over, something neat, manageable. Instead, I fumbled. I told her how the noise had kept me company for years and how the quiet last night had made the truth too loud to ignore. I said the words and then I cried. Maya squeezed my hand tighter and said, "I love you. I've always loved you. I'm proud of you." She smiled in this calm, almost ordinary way, like someone placing a new vase on a familiar shelf. "Let's order pancakes," she said, "because this deserves pancakes." After Maya, I told my sister, Lena, we're 2 years apart and have our own language built on old cartoons and burnt cookies. She wasn't surprised. "You're telling me something about yourself that helps me love you better," she said. Then she asked if I wanted her to be there when I told our parents. I said maybe, and then I said yes, and then I said I didn't know. If you've been there, you know the way courage comes in waves. Eventually, a Saturday showed up that seemed sturdy enough to hold the conversation. My parents live in a single-story house with a ramp my dad built when my grandma moved in with them for her last years. The house smells like lemon cleaner and cinnamon toast. My mom keeps a candy dish on the coffee table that nobody actually eats from, but heaven forbid it's empty. Lena came with me, and we brought a pie because news goes down easier with dessert. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my dad taught me to balance a checkbook, and my mom taught me how to fix a broken zipper. The light was soft. It felt like everything was holding its breath. I won't pretend I wasn't scared. I'm lucky to have parents who love me, but even then, you worry about the ways things might shift. I told them I had something to share that mattered to me. I told them it was about who I am, not something that happened to me. And then I said it. My mother's eyes filled immediately. She has always led with her heart. She got up and hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for telling me." My father, ever the engineer, took a moment. He looked at me like he was inspecting a blueprint, not to find fault, but to understand. He cleared his throat. "I love you," he said, "and I want to understand how to do this right." Then he asked a practical question that, at the time, made me laugh through my tears. "Do we need to change how we introduce you at church picnics? Leave it to my dad to pull the future into the room so we could look at it together. Not every part of telling my extended family and community was smooth." An aunt made a comment about waiting so long, as if I'd been late to a party I was nervous to attend. A cousin went quiet for a while, but the people at the heart of my life held steady. There's a quiet blessing in realizing your foundation is stronger than you feared. It gave me courage to try living out loud in small ways, like changing my dating app settings, joining a group for LGBTQ folks in my neighborhood, and signing up for a memoir writing workshop at the public library. The library felt like a safe place to step into a new chapter. It smelled like books and winter coats. The branch I went to has a wall of windows that let in a pale afternoon light, and there's a bulletin board where people post flyers for everything from lost cats to chair yoga. The workshop met in a room with mismatched chairs and a carpet that had seen things. Our instructor, Marjorie, is in her 70s and carries a bag of pens like a magician. She started by asking us to write about a moment when we told the truth. I thought, this is either cosmic timing or an elaborate prank. Then I put my head down and wrote. We were 8 people around that table. A nurse who wanted to write about her patients without breaking their trust. A college kid with a purple hat who had opinions about everything. A retired postal worker who told her story like a well-addressed letter. And him, Evan. I didn't know his name at first. I noticed the way he took a moment before he spoke, like he measured his words so they could land softly. He wore a brown wool sweater with a little fray at the cuff, and he had ink on the side of his hand like he'd been writing on the way over. When he read his piece, I felt the room fall away for a second. He wrote about his grandfather's tomatoes, the way the vines bent under summer, the ritual of pinching the suckers, the joy of a BLT made with your own patience. There was a line that caught me. The ripest things happen when you aren't staring at the calendar. I underlined it in my notebook, even though it wasn't mine. After class, we stacked our chairs. The college kid asked Marjorie about a reading list. Evan stood a little apart, gently folding his paper like he was putting a letter back into an envelope. I felt shy in a way I hadn't in years. Then he looked up, met my eyes, and smiled. It wasn't a fireworks smile. It was that steady kind, like the light over a front porch. I liked your piece, he said. The bit about the bathroom mirror was, well, brave. I told him I liked his tomatoes, and then we laughed at how odd that sounded. He introduced himself, Evan. It felt good to say his name, like it had already been sitting in my mouth. We walked out together into the hush of early evening. Snow wanted to happen, but hadn't committed yet. Outside, the world smelled a little like wood smoke and a little like wet mittens. We stood on the steps, not quitting the conversation because we didn't want to. He told me he taught art at the high school around the corner. I told him about my job in operations, which sounded dull when I said it out loud, and he told me it didn't, that there was an art to making a system hold people well. We weren't flirting boldly. We were stepping into a warm room carefully. When we said goodnight, he said, "I'll see you next week." And it sounded like an invitation. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he talked about ripeness. It was the opposite of everything I'd been doing. For years, I'd rushed my life to catch up to where I thought it should be. I'd pushed keys into the wrong locks just because I believed that's what grown-ups did. Sitting in my apartment that night, I found myself hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could learn to notice when a thing was ready and when it needed time. The second week of the workshop, I got there early and sat near the door. Evan arrived with a thermos and a sketchbook. He smiled again, the porch light on. We wrote about the objects we keep and why. I wrote about my blue mug, and he wrote about his grandfather's watch that doesn't keep time very well, but tells stories perfectly. When it was over, he asked if I wanted to get coffee. The question was simple. I felt my heart hammer like it had important mail to deliver. "I'd like that," I said. We walked 2 blocks to a little place that had plants in the window and a sign that said, "Be kind to baristas." He ordered tea. I ordered coffee. I told him straight away that I'd only recently come out and that dating felt like a language I was just learning how to conjugate. He put his elbows on the table and leaned in. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "We can talk slow. I'm not going anywhere. We talked about everything that first coffee. Not the big things, not yet. We talked about the books we reread when we can't sleep. He lives for Mary Oliver. I told him I keep returning to James Baldwin, to that clear, steady gaze. We talked about our neighborhoods, the way the bakery on Elm drifts the smell of cinnamon onto the sidewalk on Saturday mornings. He told me about his students and the way a shy kid's face changes when they make a color nobody has seen before. I told him about the thrill of a project coming together at work, how satisfying it is to see a plan hold. He told me he sings to his plants when he waters them. I told him I burn toast at least twice a month because I get distracted during the second slice. We laughed so easily that my shoulders forgot to tense. When we left, he walked me to my car. We didn't hug. We stood there with our breath making small clouds and our bodies making a small warmth. "Can I see you again?" he asked. I said yes so quickly it surprised us both. We settled on the farmer's market the next Saturday, because that's a place where time moves like honey, and folks say good morning to each other even if they don't have to. It snowed the morning of our market date, a powder that made everything look gently underlined. I wore too many layers and worried about whether my hat looked ridiculous. When I got there, Evan had a knit cap pulled low and a grin that made me feel brave. We walked the aisles, tasted apple slices, and bought a bunch of tulips that I carried like I was taking something sacred home. He told me about his grandmother's hands, how they could make a pie crust handle its business. I told him about how my dad measures every board twice when he builds, how that habit made all of us feel safe. We stopped at a booth where a man sold homemade candles labeled with neighborhood names. "This one smells like the park after rain," Evan said, and we laughed because it did somehow. He bought it and handed it to me. "For your place," he said. It was a small gift, so small I almost missed how big it felt. Later, at the edge of the market, a busker played "Stand By Me," and we stood under the string lights, though it was daytime, and there were people everywhere. And yet it felt like a pocket had opened just for us. He reached for my gloved hand. I let him take it. Our fingers fit together like they'd been practicing. There's a moment in a story when you can feel the hinges shift. That night, I put the candle on my table and lit it after dinner. The room took on that park after rain smell, green and clean and possible. I thought about calling him just to say goodnight, but I didn't. I wrote it down instead. I wrote down the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way he listened like I was practicing a new song and he wanted to hear every note. I wrote that I felt calm with him, which was new for me. I wrote, "Maybe this is what it feels like when the key turns easily." We kept it gentle. That was the best gift he gave me early on, his patience. We texted, and we saw each other at the workshop, and then we added a second coffee that turned into lunch, that turned into a walk along the river, our breath making white braids in the cold. I told him about the fear that I was behind. I said it like a confession. I'm 35. I don't know the rules. I'm worried I'll mess this up. He smiled at the water, and then at me. "There aren't rules," he said. "Just people trying their best not to scare each other." He told me he had come out at 26, that he had taken his own long way around. "You're not late," he said. "You're here." The first time we kissed, we were walking past a mural that says in big letters, "You are loved." It felt corny in the best way. It was not dramatic. It was a soft, certain press, a hello. The kind you feel down to your heels. I remember thinking, hold on to this. Say thank you to whatever and whoever gets credit for this. We pulled back and smiled like fools. "I've been wanting to do that," he said. "Me too," I said. We stood there, two grown men in winter coats like teenagers with their first real secret. A couple walked by with a dog wearing a sweater and said, "Cute mural." And we said, "Yeah," and then laughed because we felt seen and okay with it. Dating as a person who's new to themselves is a complicated joy. There were big firsts for me at 35 that many people have as teenagers or in their 20s. Holding a man's hand in a crowded place. Saying my boyfriend out loud without thinking it needed a whisper. Picking out a shirt to wear because I knew he liked the way it looked on me. Those things might sound small, but the small things are what make a life. We stacked those small things like stones to make something steady. There were missteps, too. The first time we went to a bar together, a guy I sort of knew from work saw us and raised his eyebrows in a way that stung more than it should have. For 2 days, I spiraled. I worried what people at the office would say. I worried I had put Evan in a position where he had to be brave for both of us. I apologized more than necessary. Evan, for his part, listened. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said something I still hear in his voice. "We do this together. I'm not a surprise you need to manage. I'm your person. Let's decide how we want to be, and then let the world catch up to us in its own time." I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patel, who looked like the kind of person you'd trust to introduce you to a good bakery. She gave me worksheets that made me roll my eyes and then helped anyway. We talked about grief, the grief of lost time, the grief of playing roles that didn't fit, and about the relief of stepping off a stage you never wanted to be on in the first place. She reminded me that coming out isn't a single event. It's a practice, a way of being tender with yourself. She suggested I tell a colleague I trusted, so I did. I told Carla, a woman who keeps succulents alive and carries extra snacks. She hugged me in the break room and said, "Thank God you said it. Now I can set you up with my cousin's husband's brother's book club if you want more friends who get it." The relief of that ordinary acceptance still tugs at my throat. Evan was patient as I built my courage. He never treated my fear like a problem to solve. Instead, he made space for it, and he made space for joy right alongside it. We cooked dinner together and burned garlic once and then learned not to. We saw a terrible movie and laughed so hard in the parking lot that people thought we were drunk. We drove to his grandfather's garden in the spring and planted tomatoes together, pushing the seedlings into the earth with those tender, hopeful hands. He showed me how to pinch the suckers. I showed him how to mark the rows with twine so they'd be straight. We stood there with dirt under our nails, feeling like we were learning how to tend something worth tending. When my parents asked about my life, I started saying Evan's name. At first, my mom would say, "How's your friend?" And I would say, "You mean my boyfriend?" in that careful way of moving language forward. It took her a little while to find the right words. It took my dad a while to not skip topics when he wasn't sure what to ask. But they tried. They tried in ways that mattered. My mom started making 2 kinds of soup because Evan doesn't like mushrooms. My dad asked if we wanted to come over on Sundays to watch football and then admitted he didn't really care about football but wanted us there. We decided, after a few months, that it was time for my family to meet Evan properly. No more friend fogginess. We picked a Sunday dinner, pot roast and potatoes, the meal that always feels like a safe place to land. Standing in my parents' driveway, I felt 13 again. Evan squeezed my hand. "We'll take it 1 fork at a time," he said, which made me laugh and breathe. My mother opened the door and pulled us both into a hug. She had that candy dish filled to the brim, like it could be a lifeline. My father shook Evan's hand like he was testing a ladder rung. Firm, careful, respectful. We sat at the table, and my dad said grace, his voice steady. Then came the questions, some good, some awkward. They asked how we met. "At the library," I said, and my mother clutched her heart like she had just heard something perfectly right. My dad asked Evan about teaching. Evan talked about a student who discovered charcoal shading and the way his eyes lit up. My mom asked what his mother's name was. "Rita," he said, and my mom said, "My sister's name is Rita," like they had found a bridge. Not everything was smooth. At one point, my father asked if we had thought about how to handle holidays, and I sputtered because I still thought of everything in terms of nervous survival. Evan answered with grace. "We haven't figured it all out yet," he said, "but we know we want to be where we can be helpful and loved." My father nodded. "We can do helpful and we can do love," he said. It was like he was making a promise, and in our family, promises are a big deal. After dinner, my mother brought out a photo album. You'd think she planned a grand reveal. It was an album of awful haircuts and baseball uniforms. Evan sat beside me and laughed kindly at the bowl-cut era. He took a picture on his phone of me at age 9, missing 2 front teeth, grinning proudly after a science fair. "I like this kid," he whispered. I felt my throat tighten. The night ended with my mother trying to send us home with too much leftover pie and my father pressing a book into Evan's hand like a good luck charm. "It's about rebuilding a motorcycle engine," he said. "You can ignore the engine. The thinking is good." On the drive home, Evan turned down the radio and said, "Your family loves you." I knew it. But hearing him say it felt like having someone put a blanket over my shoulders I didn't realize I needed. I looked out at the streetlights blooming on and said, "They're trying. I'm trying. And I'm glad you're here." He reached over and squeezed my knee. We didn't say much more. Sometimes the quiet is where the good stuff settles. Spring came. So did our first argument. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody threw anything. It was about time, which is funny considering how much time I had just found for myself. We had overscheduled a weekend, his friend's art show, my cousin's birthday, a volunteer day at the community garden, and some vague idea of making dinner with a recipe that had 4 kinds of flour. By Sunday afternoon, we were both tired and slightly brittle. A small miscommunication about whether we were leaving for the garden at 2 or 3 turned into a flare-up about priorities. "I feel like I'm always adjusting to your life," he said, and there it was. The sentence I had feared. I took a breath. I thought about how, for years, I had adjusted myself to fit. I didn't want to ask someone to do that for me. "I hear you," I said. "I don't want you to shrink around me. I want to make room." We sat on the couch, feet tangled on the carpet, and hashed out something like a plan. We made a list of the things that matter: rest, friends, family, us. We put us in the middle and drew arrows. It sounds childish, but sometimes childish tools help grown-up hearts. The hardest part for me wasn't logistics. It was the part where my old fear, that I didn't deserve this, bumped up against the new life I was building. Every time something went right, a small voice said, "Careful, it won't last." Evan was gentle with that voice. He didn't shame it. He named it. "That's the scared narrator," he'd say, smiling. "He thinks he's keeping you safe. Let's thank him, and then let the brave narrator take a turn." It sounds silly, but it helped to imagine those voices as characters I could talk to, not tyrants who controlled me. Summer rolled in. We went to the Pride Parade. I had never been before. I was nervous. I knew there would be joy, and I was ready for that. But I was also aware of being 35 and new and not sure where to stand. We stood, as it turned out, near an older couple with matching rainbow suspenders. One had a silver beard and the other had a rainbow umbrella, even though there was no rain. "First Pride?" the bearded one asked, seeing my face. "Yes," I said. He patted my shoulder. "Welcome home," he said. The marching band went by and people cheered like we were all getting baptized into something bright. I cried and didn't try to hide it. Evan squeezed my hand and kissed my temple. We danced badly to an ABBA cover, and I let myself be seen. There's a sweetness in being seen by people who have walked the road before you. We met Tom and Ray that day, the suspenders couple. They'd been together 30 years. They invited us to their backyard one Saturday where the grass was too long and the lemonade had too much sugar. They told us stories about their first apartment and the time Tom messed up a proposal by dropping the ring behind a vending machine. "We learned to forgive in that moment," Ray said, "and we've been practicing ever since." It felt like getting a map, not to copy, but to tuck in your pocket for courage. I wish I could say I moved through all of this with pure grace. But the truth is that fear still caught me sometimes when I wasn't looking. One evening, I came home from a work trip and found a flyer on my building's door from a guy running for city council. His platform was, politely put, not for me. It shook me more than I expected. I felt small in my own hallway. Evan came over with a bag of groceries. I didn't know I needed chicken soup and a loaf of bread and a stray cookie he claimed accidentally fell into the bag. We sat on the floor and ate soup with the bowls balanced on our knees. We talked about the world and the part we play. "We make our life," he said, tapping the floor between us. "We make it kind in here, and then we carry that kindness out there." It didn't solve anything big, but it put my heart back into its bones. In late summer, my dad had a health scare. He fainted in the garage. The call came while I was in a meeting, and I was out the door before my boss finished saying, "Go." At the hospital, everything smelled like sharp soap and tired. My mom sat with her purse clutched like a life raft. Lena paced and told bad jokes to keep from crying. I called Evan without thinking and said, "I'm at Mercy General," and he said, "I'm on my way." He arrived with that watchful calm and a tote bag that had snacks and a phone charger and a crossword puzzle book because he knows how to make waiting feel like time you can hold. He sat with us into the night. When my dad woke up and saw Evan, he gave a little nod like a foreman acknowledging a good worker. Later, when a nurse asked how we were all related, I said, "This is my boyfriend," and nobody flinched. It was a quiet miracle, the kind that makes you believe in the ordinary holiness of showing up. My father was fine. Dehydration and stubbornness, as the doctor said with a wink. But that night changed the way my parents looked at Evan. He wasn't an idea anymore. He was a person who had sat in the uncomfortable chair, who had fetched ice chips, who had made my mother laugh with a story about a student who wore a shirt that said, "I paused my game to be here," to an art critique. After that, Evan's name moved into the center of our family conversations like the name of a new baby everyone is learning to say with care. A year passed. I turned 36. We celebrated with a picnic in the park and a cake Evan baked with a lopsided 36 in blue frosting, like a license plate number. I blew out the candles and felt, truly, like I had arrived at myself. We took a photo where I am the kind of happy that still surprises me when I see it. If you've ever looked at an old photo and recognized an expression you've been practicing your whole life, you know what I mean. My smile used to be polite. It is less polite now. It is real. There were still those old worries that popped up like dandelions through sidewalk cracks. Sometimes I worried I had taken too long and missed chances I might never get back. I worried I wouldn't know how to be someone's partner in a way that honored all of him, not just the parts that lay easily against me. I worried about the world and the ways it makes tender people into shapes they didn't choose. Evan didn't make those worries disappear. He did something better. He sat with them. We sat at the kitchen table and wrote them down. Then we wrote what we knew to be true beside them. We love each other. We make each other kinder. We make a good team. We can ask for help. We can learn. That fall, my boss offered me a promotion that came with a move. It was the kind of opportunity that looked shiny on paper. It was also 100 miles away. Before I came out, I would have said yes without asking my heart any questions. That's what I had always done. Said yes to the map everyone else was holding. Now I had someone whose life held mine. I had a garden row of tomatoes that needed tending and a writing workshop on Wednesday nights and a Sunday rhythm at my parents' house. I told my boss I needed time to think. I told Evan before anyone else. We sat on the floor with a city map laid out like we were planning a heist. His face did that careful thing it does when he's holding something heavy with me. I want you to have a life that feels like yours, he said. If that means you take the job and we figure it out, I'm here to figure it out. If that means we ask if there's a way to make it work here, we ask. We made lists. It was the autumn of lists. Pros and cons and soft categories like how it feels. We talked late. We walked early. We asked our people for advice and got 100 different answers. In the end, I realized something tender and true. The map had changed. My coordinates were no longer a title and a number. My coordinates were faces around a table, a porch-light smile, a hand reaching for mine in the dark when my father's name appeared on my phone screen. I said no to the move. I said yes to the life I was building with both hands. We celebrated by buying a plant we were both unsure we could keep alive. It was one of those fiddle-leaf figs that has a reputation for being dramatic. We named it Myrtle and promised her we'd do our best. We set her in the corner of my living room, where the light is generous. Evan came over with a bag of soil and a mister, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. We are plant people now, he announced. Myrtle proceeded to drop a leaf a day for a week. It felt like being humbled by a green diva. We looked up tips. We moved her 6 inches to the left like we were repositioning a satellite dish. One morning, she held on to her leaves. We cheered like she'd scored a goal. If this sounds like a domestic montage, it was and it wasn't. It was a collection of the small, deliberate choices people make when they are building a life that fits. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market buying tulips in spring and apples in fall. Wednesday nights at the library, now as helpers, setting up chairs while Marjorie told us about the book she was finally, after all these years, going to write. Sunday afternoons at my parents' table, where my mother no longer fumbles over the word boyfriend and my father no longer pretends to care about football as a pretext for sitting side by side content. Tuesday evenings at the community garden where the tomatoes leaned into their steaks like old men at a counter. Trading secrets with the basil. It's funny how the world, once you are honest with it, offers you echoes of your honesty. I got a call from my cousin, the quiet one, who said, I want you to know that seeing you be you made me braver. He didn't mean about being gay. He meant about changing jobs, about telling our aunt he wasn't going to take over the family business. Courage begets courage. It doesn't matter the category. It's the act of refusing to be smaller than your own light. I told Evan I loved him on a Tuesday because ordinary days can hold extraordinary things. We were sitting on a bench by the river eating sandwiches too big for our faces. He had mustard on his lip. People walked by with dogs and strollers and the last of summer on their shoulders. I had planned to say it at a more cinematic moment, but the truth was full and warm and needed air. I said, I love you, and it felt like tossing a stone into a lake and waiting for the rings to find the shore. His face opened. He put his sandwich down carefully, the man loves a pastrami, and said, I love you too. We sat there, two grown men with condiments and big feelings, smiling like we had found a lost thing and watched it jump into our hands. I don't know what kind of story you expected when you clicked on this. The title makes it sound like a neat arc. I came out at 35, then I met him, then ta-da. But life is kinder and messier than titles. It's about 1,000 small choices made with love. It's about the way he changed the battery in my smoke detector without making me feel useless. It's about watching him fall asleep with a book on his chest. It's about calling his mother, Rita, to get her recipe for those meatballs that taste like sundaes. It's about text messages that say, "You got this," and "Call me when you get home," and "I saw a dog that looked like a baked potato and thought of you." If you're hearing my voice and thinking, "Maybe it's too late for me, I want to say this like a gentle friend, love doesn't keep a ledger of birth dates." It pays attention to whether you show up. It cares whether you tell the truth. It shows up in brown wool sweaters and ink-stained hands and tomato vines that don't care if you're 35 or 75 when you finally learn to pinch the suckers. My story isn't a blueprint. It's a lantern held up so you can see the next few steps. The rest you'll discover. We didn't move in together right away. We spent a year practicing being each other's person without asking our closets and sofas to commit. Then one evening, Evan set a key on my table. It was attached to a tag cut from his sketchbook. On one side, he had drawn the outline of our city skyline with that mural's words, "You are loved," tucked into the buildings. On the other, he had written, "For when you want to come home." I set my key on top of his, feeling like a boy and a man at the same time, thrilled, humbled, a little scared, and very sure. We didn't make a speech. We just sat there, hands covering the keys, like two people making a quiet vow. If there was a miracle in all of this, it wasn't that I came out at 35 and met a man who understood me. The miracle was that once I spoke, I could hear. I could hear the soft instructions I'd ignored. Be gentle, rest, say what you need, listen back. I could hear the way my father's footsteps changed when he tried. I could hear my mother learning new words and wanting to get them right. I could hear my own voice in the morning when the city bus sighed and the dog walked his owner past the maple tree. It sounded like a life opening. And if you're watching this alone in your kitchen too, with a dented mug and a window and wondering if it's time, I can't tell you. I can tell you that the world didn't collapse when I said the words. I can tell you that the door opened more easily than I feared. I can tell you that there's a man in a brown sweater somewhere, in whatever form he takes in your story, waiting to meet the truest version of you. And I can promise that whenever you do it, 35, 50, 70, there will be people and parks and parades and quiet dinners waiting to make room. Evan just texted me a photo of Myrtle, by the way. She has a new leaf. It's the kind of green that makes you believe in future summers. He wrote, "She's dramatic, but she's ours." And I laughed because it's true about the plant and sometimes about us. We're learning. We're blooming at the speed that makes sense for who we are. And every day the key turns a little more easily, and every day the door opens into more of this, the ordinary miracle of showing up, of loving and being loved back.